It's been about a week since James Damore released his internal memo at Google describing what he referred to as an ideological echo chamber within the company. And a lot has happened since then. The first and perhaps most noticeable being that James himself was let go. He was fired for publishing what outlets such as Gizmodo refer to as a 10-page screed. The memo itself sought to address the issue of diversity and hiring practices at Google, as well as the reasons for the disproportionate number of men and women within the tech field in general. Speculation as to why this was, and to the effect it was having on the company, with James attempting to state that they lacked a diversity of opinion, and that it was this that was having a far greater impact than, say, something like simply diversity within gender. Within the span of 24 hours of its release, the internet was bombarded by reactions from Google and Google employees as word spread about what James had written. People were literally shaking. They just couldn't. I can't even. I'm literally shaking right now. And it wasn't long until Google CEO Sundar Pichai released a statement addressing the matter, in which he said that while some of the issues James had raised were fair for discussion, part of it, quote, advanced harmful gender stereotypes. And so, he was out of job. In the subsequent days that followed, James would go on to explain that the issues he brought up within the memo were ones which he personally had raised previously, and that at no time in the past had any employee he had broached the subject with had an issue with it. Yet after going public, that all seemingly changed. And we soon began to see glimpses of this ideological echo chamber that Damore had been talking about, most notably with former Google employees attempting to create a blacklist to help ensure that James would never be able to find work within the industry again. People such as Kelly Ellis, who openly discussed on Twitter her attempts, as well as the attempts of others, to stymie both James and his supporters' future job prospects. But it didn't end there. Now, seemingly not content to merely fire James, Google appeared to want to give a nod of sorts to these efforts to blacklist him. While most would find the idea of a company tacitly supporting ex-employees creating a blacklist for people within their own industry to be foolish, Google, it appears, did not. But that shouldn't really come as a surprise to you, though, because it would appear that this mentality is something which has existed within the company for years now. Take, for example, this post made by Adam Fletcher from all the way back in 2015. While Google appears to be doing very little to quell the hostile voices that exist inside the company, I want those hostile voices to know I will never ever hire you or transfer you onto my team. Ever. I don't care if you are a perfect fit or technically excellent or whatever. I will actively not work with you, even to the point where your team or product is impacted by this decision. I'll communicate why to your manager if it comes up. You're being blacklisted by people at companies outside of Google. You might not have been aware of this, but people know. People talk. There will always be social consequences. And he's not alone. Others at the company have shared this same opinion throughout the years. Blacklists do exist. They should exist. Tech companies talk with one another, and you will suffer consequences for disagreeing with groupthink. It would appear then that just from this small cross-sampling of current and former employees, that perhaps James's memo wasn't as far off the mark as some news outlets would have you believe. That there really may exist an ideological echo chamber at the company, and that diversity of opinion really isn't tolerated all that well. But what exactly is the underlying foundation for that echo chamber? How did it establish itself, and is it merely confined to Google? Or is it an industry-wide phenomena? Well, I'd wager that those working in the tech industry on the back end experience something very similar to what a user would on the front end. Namely, the 3Ds. Demotivate, demonetize, deplatform. Demotivation is something we've seen play itself out on numerous social media platforms now for a number of years, be it shadow banning on Reddit or the soon-to-be introduced limited state on YouTube. The concept is roughly the same. Isolate a user from the general population, limit their ability to interact with others, and watch as they gradually lose their motivation to continue. Demonetization is the more recent of the three. Its goal is to cut off any and all financial backing an individual may have, to essentially starve them into the gutter, and hope that this lack of revenue diverts their attention into other efforts to sustain themselves. The adpocalypse, as some YouTubers have dubbed it, would be one such example. Others would include removing individuals from payment processing services altogether. Finally, there's deplatforming. This is the most direct and devastating of the bunch. Unlike the other two, deplatforming seeks to utterly remove an individual from as many services as possible. And much like Fletcher himself brought up when he stated that companies talk, users have seen instances of where their removal from one platform seems to create a cascade of bannings, removing them from multiple others. In Dunmore's case, the demotivation would be shunning from those within his own industry. The demonetization would be his firing, and the deplatforming would be getting blacklisted. So, what exactly is causing this, and how does it tie back into what James wrote about in his memo? Well, to better understand that, you really need to take a look at some of the events that have played themselves out over the last 5 years within the tech industry itself. By examining these events, you're able to see the issue as a whole and some possibilities as to where this all originated. Certain individuals, concepts, and organizations seem to repeatedly reappear, each touching on or in some way related to events that help to shape this current atmosphere of shutting down differing opinions. Even looking back to Google, once again, you can start to see what helped to shape, at least partially, the outlook the company currently has. Individuals such as Randy Lee Harper, who reportedly, while decrying things such as cyber harassment, were they themselves involved in what appeared to be that very same activity. Or people like Rose Eveleth, who helped to make a man who landed a probe on a comet cry because of his fashion sense.
The shirt I wore this week, I made a big mistake and I've offended many people, and I'm very sorry about this.
These were just a few of the people that Google Ideas thought were a good choice to bring on board and advise how they could combat the larger issues facing their platforms. But as I stated earlier, this is a phenomena which extends well beyond something happening simply at Google. It is in fact industry-wide. Take for example the following story, and how its players meander their way from one touchstone moment of policymaking to the next. Mozilla CEO states Reddit users' anonymous comments crossed the line in relation to a post about the exit of community organizer Christine Kohler from the company. The user's comments, which are still viewable on R-Linux, say the following. Frankly, everyone was glad to see the back of Christine Kohler. She was batshit insane and permanently offended at everything. When she and the rest of her blue-haired, nose-ringed asshole feminists are gone, the tech industry will breathe a sigh of relief. Now, if you click back a bit from this comment, you're brought here, which is discussing GitHub and their attempts at creating an open source code of conduct. Harassment includes physical contact and simulated physical contact, e.g., textual descriptions like hug or back rub, without consent or after a request to stop. Because cyber hugs are clearly rape, and emoticons, well, those are just outright molestation. So where exactly does this particular code of conduct originate from? Well, searching the quoted portion the user highlighted in their comment leads you to geek feminism. And sure enough, a simple scroll through the page leads directly to the quoted line itself, as well as other policies related to how to behave around other people. Because, if you don't tell people not to shit in the punch bowl at a party, they totally will. But it's the attribution at the bottom of the page that helps to show whose hands guided the creation of this most closely. And among them is Valerie Aurora, one of the principal founders of the ADA Initiative. The ADA Initiative is, or I probably should say was, an organization whose stated goal was to help women in tech through a myriad of means. Outside of developing a code of conduct for conferences and companies, they sought to use feminism to fix the tech industry. The ADA Initiative is a feminist organization. We strive to serve the interests and needs of women in open technology and culture who are at the intersection of multiple forms of oppression, including disabled women, women of color, LGBTQ women, and women from around the world. We are making a difference in open technology and culture by supporting and connecting women in these communities, changing the culture to better fit women instead of changing women to fit the culture, helping women overcome internalized sexism that is the result of living within the existing culture, asking men and influential community members to take responsibility for cultural change, giving people the tools they need to change their community, e.g. policies and ally skills, creating sustainable systems to support feminist activities in these communities, being the change we want to see by making our own events and communities safer and more inclusive. They even went so far as to hold seminar, as their YouTube account really only has one listing currently available: Overcoming Imposter Syndrome. Overcoming Imposter Syndrome. the Feminist Tech website created a seminar on how to help women in tech not feel like total frauds at their job. And when you take some time to look at Valerie Aurora and what she lists or describes herself as, you find out that she is a feminist activist. That is the occupation she is most known for. And her opinions would seemingly follow suit with that. Another 2013 controversy that received commentary from Aurora was Donglegate, in which PyCon attendee Adria Richards faced backlash for reporting a conversation overheard between two men sitting near her. Aurora condemned the threat sent to Richards and stated that Anonymous, by using large numbers of computers, was distorting social pressure. When asking if firing one of the males was an appropriate response, she said, "I don't have enough information to know that." 2 years later, Aurora praised the gender ratio at PyCon and called Guido van Rossum and the PyCon community the biggest success story for women in open source. In the same interview, she approved of the culture of the website Tumblr. Because, of course. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with who Adria Richards is and what Donglegate is referring to, two individuals who were at a convention Adria herself was attending happened to make a joke related to a piece of equipment referred to as a dongle. The joke was semi-crude, but nothing that you would not normally be accustomed to hearing when talking about a dongle. However, Adria found this to be horrifically sexist and went about a campaign of taking pictures of these two individuals and trying to get them fired. Now, she would succeed in getting one of the men fired, and then she herself would be fired as people looked into who she was and statements she herself had made on social media in the past, all culminating in a ironic end to that particular shitstorm. And that was simply one example of how the start of one story ends up involving 18 others, simply by merit of the fact of the people involved. But through it, you're able to see one of the issues that starts to become a reoccurring one, namely the hardline promotion and injection of feminism into tech. Another clear example of this would be the GNOME Outreach bankruptcy debacle. Simply put, GNOME was part of a push to bring more women into tech. Their solution? The outreach program for women. But alas, they ran into just one tiny little issue. Just one tiny itty-bitty little overlooked fact. The amount of money invested into the outreach program itself nearly completely outstripped their yearly financials, rendering them completely up shit creek. Funnily enough, if you look around for interviews related to the program around the time this happened, you'll find one. Hosted on the ADA Initiative. I think my favorite excerpt from it is this. One of the things that I love about the program is that many of the women who come through it wind up being our best advocates. Some of our former participants have gone on to speak about the program at conferences and in their communities. Some other participants become mentors in future rounds. One participant now serves on GNOME's board of directors and is our treasurer. So the outreach program for women hires a woman from the program to manage finances, and this nearly results in the complete financial collapse of the organization entirely.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme. Every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
But as the saying goes, never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. Then again, old Hanlon didn't work in the tech industry, now did he? On the other hand, Eric S. Raymond did. In fact, he was well known in it. So just imagine the reaction he garnered when he publicly stated that feminists were creating honey traps in an effort to frame tech leaders. In a blog post this week, Raymond dropped this bomb on the internet. The short version is this. If you are any kind of open source leader or senior figure who is male, do not be alone with any female ever at a technical conference. Try to avoid even being alone ever, because there is a chance that a women in tech advocacy group is going to try to collect your scalp. Raymond's evidence for this assertion came from an unnamed source I trust with whom he shared an IRC chat. The source accuses some members of the ADA Initiative, an organization that supported women in open technology and culture through activities such as producing codes of conduct and anti-harassment policies, of trying to pre-generate outrage and collect scalps. The MO was to get them alone with a target, and then immediately after cry attempted sexual assault. Raymond's source alleges, going on to say that Linux kernel supremo, Linus Torvald, is never alone at any open source events because he is aware of the potential for such incidents? Well, there's that group again, the ADA Initiative. Interesting, isn't it, how it seems to continually pop up time and time again? Of course, both the real-world examples being given and the parallel to the points they help to illuminate within Damore's memo don't end merely with a push for diversity of hire or feminism in tech. They also apply to political ideology as well. Disagree with gay marriage? Then, like Brendan Ike, you can't be the CEO of Mozilla. Want to support Donald Trump for president? Then, like Palmer Luckey, you need to leave Facebook. There appears to be a strong, if unspoken, rule about what politics are allowable and which are unallowable when it comes to Silicon Valley and tech in general. And this then brings it all the way back to the memo itself and to the questions which it helped to raise in the first place about whether or not an ideological echo chamber did exist, and if so, what was a part of its underlying foundation. When looking at these events, along with a host of others, it starts to become fairly clear that Damore wasn't so off his mark. There has been a push in tech to secure a diversity in the workplace, especially among the sexes, while at the same time seemingly foregoing the notion that diversity in opinion has any merit at all. Multiple instances of organizations and individuals reoccurring quite commonly seem to, time and time again, arise to create firestorms, which leave all those affected the worse for wear, while they publicly go about announcing it as some sort of victory. Is it any wonder then that opinion and tech seems to toe the party line, when it's clear from observation, when it doesn't, what the outcome will be? This issue is bigger than simply one company. While Google may have been the touchstone for this particular arc, the story itself is tech. When your industry is rife with blacklisting, back-channel attempts at sabotage, potential plots to entrap, and the inability to openly express your own opinion for fear of retribution, then all the claims that the industry has made about inclusivity and openness and safe spaces is merely a false facade, smoke and mirrors meant to fool the masses into believing that when they say equality for all, they meant it, when in reality, equality for some is a far more accurate description. All the buzzwords which are so readily bandied about these days, such as toxicity and problematic, are really just guises worn by shitty people to do awful things to coworkers whose opinions they believe to be wrongthink. And so, in closing, I ask you, after having heard all of this, was James Damore wrong?
Really makes you think.